All right. Hello, Laracon Online. I am Samantha Geitz. I've given a couple of different Laracon talks before, so I'm sure most of you have probably heard of me. For the last 3.5 years or so, I worked at a company called Titan that also most of you have probably heard of. Matt Stauffer, who owns Titan, is giving the talk after mine, and it's going to be, I'm sure, amazeballs, so make sure you stick around and check it out. I actually just started a new company called Shelter Love. We build software for animal shelters and rescues, so kind of an exciting new adventure. But I'm going to talk to you guys today about blockchain, something I've been playing around with for about 6 months or so, and I feel like a lot of people in the Laravel community haven't had a lot of exposure to this yet. I really haven't been seeing much buzz about it. I feel like there's just not a lot of libraries out there. So I'm kind of going into this talk with these assumptions about you as my audience, if you are anything like me before I started playing around with this. So blockchain, it's a buzzword. People are really passionate about it, either on the pro side or the con side, but it's definitely buzzwordy. It has coins or something, like, you know, it's related to cryptocurrency somehow, but maybe not really how. One of those coins is Bitcoin. And if you're in tech, you've probably been hearing about Bitcoin for a while, even back when it was like a penny. And I think as of today, a single Bitcoin is worth about $4,000. So at its peak, it was about 20,000. So yeah, I think a lot of us kind of wish we had invested in it when it was literally like a penny for a single Bitcoin. And if you're like me, you probably are assuming that it's some technology that's like .NET or Java or something that's not necessarily accessible to someone who mostly knows like PHP and JavaScript. So spoiler alert, you can use it in your Laravel apps. We're going to look at some demo code. It's very, very basic, but yeah, kind of show you like how you can do that pretty easily. The question is, should you use it in your Laravel apps? If you're on Twitter, I am sure you have seen this kind of meme of like, should I use blockchain? No. People just shut it down and they say it's just this like bad technology that's going to completely go away. Kind of like how when we all jumped on like the MongoDB train a couple of years back, and then it turned out that sometimes that's not the best use case for NoSQL. But you're also seeing stuff like this, where there's a ton of money in the space right now. If you can read this, it says that last year in the first 3 quarters, there was $3.9 billion in venture capital. I went to a conference, FundConf, back in October, and it was like a VC conference. And blockchain was like the thing. All of these investors were super pumped about it, and people were giving like TechCrunch style little pitches about their startups, and they were all like disrupting something with the blockchain. So I feel like it's really hard to parse out like whether this is a technology that is worth building our applications on. So I am today not going to try to convince you to just like dump your applications and rewrite it in the blockchain. There are a couple of really specific problems that blockchain is a cool technology with some like awesome use cases. For the most part, you probably don't want to use it. But what I'm going to talk to you about, we're going to first kind of go through what it is, how it relates to like cryptocurrency. We're going to talk about the kind of pros and cons compared to just using a MySQL database. I want to specifically kind of explain these concepts for Laravel developers who are used to like Eloquent and kind of rewriting that way. We're going to talk about some good use cases for blockchain for your application. We'll look at 3 real-world production examples that have made people a lot of money. And then, like I said, I built a little demo project using Laravel and Vue, so we'll kind of poke around at that too. And we'll talk about how you can get started if you are building an app and you're like, yeah, actually this piece of it could be really cool on the blockchain. So I'll share some libraries and apps that are like really, really easy to get you going. So before we begin though, so we're gonna play a little game a little bit later in the talk. So I wanna make sure everyone watching at home is ready for it. So if you go to the laracon.net chat and speaker questions, I created this thread called the blockchain game. So just kind of leave it open in the background. It's gonna be kind of like a fastest fingers game. So you definitely wanna be like ready to jump on it. And I'll give you about a 2-minute warning when you're like ready to go too. And if you win, I will personally name you the elitist of the Laravel elites on Twitter, which I know is worth more than any other prize I could possibly give you guys. So, all right, so we're gonna start. We're just gonna go super down to the studs and just talk about MySQL. This is stuff that all of you know, all of you understand, hopefully, if you're at Laracon Online. But if you have a MySQL database, generally speaking, it's going to be a single database sitting behind a server. And obviously, if you're running at scale, like you might have some sort of like multi-tenant load balancing DevOps magic happening. But for the most part, most apps, just one database, and that is your source of truth for all clients. And by that, I generally mean like web browsers connecting to an app. And if you want to like add data to the database or update it, you just kind of add a new row or update existing rows, right? So it's pretty straightforward. So anyone who has access to that database can theoretically go in and change that data. So if I have the host and the user and the password, I could go into something like SQL Pro and just kind of change data. And if I don't have backups or logging set, like there's not really a great way to know that the data was changed. It's not necessarily going to do an updated ad. And the data tends to be kind of fragile because there is that one just central source of truth. So if you delete your database, if you drop a table, if your server goes down, that data is totally inaccessible. And I feel like most of us have had at least one major heart attack in our career, if not multiple, where we're like, oh my end, we thought I was on local, but I was really on production and the data's gone. I have to restore from a backup. Oh God, everything is on fire. So yeah, that's a definite downside to this kind of technology. But at the end of the day, you can almost think of it like an Excel spreadsheet, right? Like it has rows, it has columns. You can just kind of double click on a cell and edit it. So yeah, that's just kind of how that works. I have a little diagram, which should be pretty obvious to anyone who's a programmer, but yeah, you have your central source of truth and basically everyone is connecting to it through the server. Let's go water break. All right, so how is blockchain different from that? The biggest thing, instead of having that one central source of truth, you basically have a bunch of computers that are called nodes, and they have a copy of the entire database. And they're all kind of like talking to each other. So you don't ever really have that like one point of vulnerability, like everyone is kind of running this thing. The other major difference, so you can read data from the blockchain and you can add new records to the blockchain, but you can't just like do the equivalent of double clicking on a cell and just like changing the data. That's not how it works, which doesn't sound very useful because obviously if you have an application, you need to change the state of it sometimes, right? So if you want to update your data, you add new blocks to the blockchain, but that shows how the existing data should change. So I imagine pretty much everyone watching is at least familiar in passing with Git, and it kind of works the same way. I mean, not really, it's not like the same technology under the hood, but you have a Git repository. That is kind of like the source of truth for your code. And people might have like cloned it and everyone's kind of committing to this central thing, but you have sequential commits, right? You're not going in and FTPing into your server and changing code. Hopefully, please don't do that if you are doing that. And if at some point I try to go back and like amend a previous commit and do a Git force push, like it's gonna screw up everyone's copies of the repository. Like you're always just gonna wanna add new data to change like what is the code base right now. A lot of people describe blockchain like a ledger. So if you just have a book and you're just kind of writing down transactions one after the other, and then you're getting the balance by going through and just looking at all these transactions. But it's permanent ink, right? Like you can't go back and change it because everyone kind of has like a copy. So if you do try to edit that data, like I said, it will be different than everyone else's. So you just kind of can't do it. Everyone is trying to find this consensus on what the data is. And that theoretically is really highly secure. It's kind of tamper-proof. There are kind of ways to attack that if you have like over 51% of the share of it, but we're not going to go into the details on that. But that's why a lot of technologies now, especially in the financial sector, are being built on this, is because you're not like kind of relying on one entity. It's totally distributed. So we have a little diagram here. I don't know that you would necessarily be running blockchain on your phone, but basically you can see like everyone's running these like basically databases and they're all talking to each other. So it's all just kind of like the shared thing. So you're probably sitting there thinking like, actually, that sounds pretty cool. Like, why is everyone saying that you shouldn't maybe be using blockchain in your application? So the problem is when something happens, so you have all these computers on the network, right? And they all need to talk to each other and figure out that something took place every single time you change the data. So it's slow. there are going to be a lot of records. You're not going in and changing a cell, you're adding new stuff. So it gets really big, really fast. Comparatively, it can be really expensive to be kind of doing this stuff. Like you're running it on a computer, it takes electricity. You have to like kind of pay, and we'll go through like how you can actually add stuff, but you need to like pay to add stuff to it. So yeah, it definitely can cost a lot more money than something like just a MySQL database running on like a $5 DigitalOcean droplet. They say that basically if you can't do it on a smartphone from 1999, it's probably not a good use case from the blockchain. Like you can do a certain amount of business logic, but yeah, if you want to get like really kind of detailed with stuff, you might want to just stick to like a traditional ORM. So why are people using it? So we're going to go through 3 different real world examples. And then, like I said, I have my fake Laravel app that we'll kind of poke around at too. And I do have it up on GitHub. I will share the repo after the talk too. So the first one we're going to talk about is the one you have all heard of, Bitcoin. And we're going to go through kind of a little bit more under the hood of how this technology works using this thing. So why does Bitcoin exist? Why are people so excited about this and putting so much money into this? So traditional currency, and by that I mean cash, credit cards, debit cards, you have banks and governments that have basically all of the control of the money, right? Like you're putting all of your money in this bank and you're kind of just hoping that they're not gonna crash and lose it like happened during the Great Depression or something. Governments, kind of same thing, like they are printing money. At this point, money is kind of just like money because we believe it's money, like we're not on the gold standard or anything anymore. So theoretically, if we wanted to just print unlimited money in the United States, like there's nothing to stop us from doing that really. That's how you run into situations like, pre-World War II Germany, where it was literally cheaper to burn paper money for fuel than to go buy bread because just inflation was crazy out of control. Another big problem is like credit card forgery and credit card fraud and forged currency. So if I put my credit card number on the screen right now with the expiration and like the security code, theoretically, I mean, aside from just laws, there is nothing to stop you guys from just going on shopping sprees. Same with forged currency. Like if I printed money that was convincing enough of a fake, and then I went to my local grocery store and just gave them a 20 and they realized it was fake money, you just kind of are stuck with this piece of paper that isn't worth anything. It's a lot harder to forge money than it used to be. We have a lot of kind of security things built into dollar bills and stuff now, but it's a problem. And any of you who have like run, especially SaaS apps and stuff, know that disputes are a huge problem and a huge PITA. Like if you have too many disputes, they could shut your Stripe account down. It's just the whole process to get that resolved. It's, people just kind of want to yank their money back. Like they have a certain amount of power to do so. So how does Bitcoin actually work? So let's say that you love my talk so much and you built some blockchain app because you were inspired by it. And you're like, I want to send Samantha Geitz a Bitcoin, which hopefully by that point be worth more than $4,000. But you have 2 ways to get Bitcoin right now. You're totally starting from zero. The first one is to go on like a cryptocurrency exchange and just buy them with either real money or another cryptocurrency, because there are others besides Bitcoin. Or you can do something that's called mining. And we're going to kind of go into detail later about what that actually means. So you would download the Bitcoin software. And like I said, you'd have a copy of the entire history, which is about 150 gigabytes. And that would add your computer as a node to the network. Like I said, just a computer kind of running this peer-to-peer network. So, so that software that you download is called a wallet. And I find the term wallet to be kind of misleading because for me, wallet says like, I have my money in the wallet. But wallets don't actually have your Bitcoins or your cryptocurrency. They have 2 different keys. So the first one, and if you guys have done any like Laravel passport stuff, you're probably familiar with private and public keys, at least to an extent. But a private key, just a really, really long, randomly generated string, and it's unique to you. So it's really, really important if you ever do anything cryptocurrency that you do keep your private key private. They sell little like doodads where you can buy like actual hardware to store it on. People will write it down on paper and put it in lockboxes in banks. If you ever hear situations about like just a bunch of cryptocurrency just like disappearing into the void, a lot of times it's because like someone died and they didn't have the private key or something. So yeah, but again, very important, you don't share your private key if you're doing anything with crypto. But you do need a way to identify yourself on the network, right? So that's where your public key comes in. So it's basically just your public address. It's created from your private key, but that you can totally share, and that's how people would find you. So if you wanted to send me a Bitcoin and you have my public key, you just enter it in your little wallet software and say you want to send me a Bitcoin. And then your wallet would automatically go to the network and say, okay, cool, I have this new transaction, and they would sign it with your private key, and that creates a hash. And if you don't know, or you're not entirely sure what a hash is, we'll go into that in a second here. But the cool thing about it is if you have the public key and then you have that hash that's generated of the transaction, it can be verified on the network, and you don't ever have to reveal your private key to anyone. So how that works in the Laravel context that you are all hopefully familiar with. So if you had just like a totally standard Laravel app and your user signs up and they'll type in a password, it might be foobar, it might be secret, like whatever it is. So you would save it either with like the hash facade, there's a bcrypt helper, you might do this in like your registration controller, you might do this in your user model with a mutator, but you don't ever want to store plain text passwords in a database, right? Like that's programming 101, like pretty much most people know that by this point. So it's stored like something like this, just this really long, weird string. And you know that if you have access to that string, if a hacker got into your database and found that string, they couldn't necessarily use that to get foobar as the password. You can check foobar against that hash by doing like an auth check, right? And it'll return like, yes, this is the correct password, or no, this is not the correct password. But you can't turn this into foobar. So that's basically how like verifying a transaction works, right? Like you've got your public key and you got your transaction, and you can check them and say, yep, these two belong together. It comes from this person. So actually adding data to the blockchain. I said that the Bitcoin thing is like 150 gigabytes, and you have to have a way to have people be kind of maintaining this, right? So they can validate these transactions and make sure everything is kind of talking to each other. It can cost a lot of money to run like Bitcoin software on your computer. Your electricity bills will totally go up. So how do you get people to do this and not just like send a Bitcoin and then shut it down? So the solution to that is something called mining. So what mining does, it basically takes groups of transactions and then validates them and adds them to the blockchain. And the reason people actually like want to do mining is when you successfully mine, it pays out in Bitcoins. Currently, like it's about $47,000. At its peak, I think it was about $250,000. Like there's a lot of money to be made in successfully mining. So we're going to talk about a little bit more about mining, and then we're going to play the game to kind of like demonstrate how mining works. So 2-minute warning, go into the chat and the speaker questions, and it's the blockchain, right, I forget what the thread is called. It's a Samantha Geitz thing, blockchain game, I think it's called. So quick guide to mining. If you want to put a transaction on the network, like you want to send me a Bitcoin, you have to actually pay a little bit more to do that. So the way that works is you're basically bidding for like miners to be including your transaction in that block. They'll get that fee as a reward if they mine it successfully, in addition to the 12.5 Bitcoins. So the network will send like these groups of transactions as another hash. So that's created with just like another random number. So basically then all of these miners have these transactions and they're trying to like decrypt it. So we're gonna play the game now. So you guys are all miners, and I'm just thinking of a random number between 1 and 200. So this is like the nonce. So you guys just need to start throwing random numbers in the chat, unlimited guesses. Just start guessing. I'm gonna open this up here. You are not getting a Bitcoin out of this person who asked that, I'm sorry. I don't actually own any Bitcoin. Oh man. Oh man, I love this. Okay. This is way, I thought this was going to be an actual chat room originally. So I'm going to give this another minute here. Okay, it's really close to this one if you guys are all guessing. Oh man, I am totally picking this chat room. All right, Spencer Hale count. The number was 77. Congratulations, you are the successful miner. All right, let me go back to my slides here. So yeah, that is literally pretty much how mining works. So there's just this random 256-bit number. You have all these computers on the network, like all these nodes, who are just like number, and just guessing it as fast as they can. So the first miner to guess it gets those 12.5 Bitcoins, which, like I said, is right now about $47,000. And then also the transaction fees that people paid. And then everyone else, at least with Bitcoin, just kind of loses. So then once those transactions are verified, like, because you have the nonce, you can verify the transactions, like you know the solution to this puzzle, right? So it just kind of adds the new block. But this is why people are spending a ton of money on hardware for like Bitcoin. You can use like a CPU or a GPU. People have like just these massive buildings just filled with stuff to just mine Bitcoin. And you also have what are called mining pools, where you have a bunch of people who say, okay, we're all going to try to guess these numbers. And then if one of us gets it, we'll just kind of split the reward. So what if you try to spend a coin twice? What if you also want to send a talk to Matt Stauffer because his talk is amazing? So basically the network just kind of knows like an order in which the transactions come in. And then if the two transactions contradict, like you just are out of Bitcoin, basically it just rejects it and then you can't have it be part of that block. So why is that called mining? This feels like kind of a weird term for just throwing numbers at something, right? So in the original Bitcoin white paper, when it was totally theoretical, they said at any given point in time, there will only ever be a maximum of 21 million Bitcoins. So we're expected to hit that number around like 2,140. But basically right now, there are like a limited number of Bitcoins in circulation, and then new Bitcoins are added as people are successfully mining. So that 12.5 currently Bitcoins as the reward are just added to the pool, just kind of like Bitcoins people can transact with. So every 4 years or so, that number is going to be cut in half. Eventually, the reward is going to be super small, and basically you'll just get the transaction fees for successfully mining. But that is how Bitcoin like has value and how they keep it from just like becoming worthless because there's just so much of it. So you're probably sitting here thinking like, okay, cool, that's maybe useful if I want to do a Bitcoin app, but like, what if I wanted to do other data? Like, why are people building apps on the blockchain? So you actually don't have to just do like cryptocurrency. You can use something called Ethereum. There are a couple others as well, but Ethereum is the most popular one. And it's technology that is specifically for building applications. It does not have to necessarily be financial. So they have this thing called smart contracts, and you can store either just data, a small amount of business logic. Smart contracts can like talk to each other, but you're storing those on the blockchain. But the cool thing that I didn't realize until pretty recently was it's built in JavaScript. So it's actually really, really accessible to any like Laravel developers, because I feel like most of us are at least somewhat proficient in JavaScript. And there's some really great JavaScript libraries and tooling. So yeah, you can totally like do Ethereum stuff in your Laravel apps, as we will see in a bit here. So Ethereum mining is similar to Bitcoin mining, but you're not mining Bitcoin, obviously. You're mining Ether. So you can almost think of it like gas. You'll hear that term used a lot. So it's kind of like computational power that if you want to add data to the blockchain, so you're not sending like Bitcoin as a transaction fee, but you can set the like maximum amount of Ether that you're willing to pay on like a transaction. So the miners are going and doing their stuff, and they use however much like they're using just in pure computational power. And if you have some left over, it's refunded back to you. So that's kind of cool. And the other thing that's like really neat about Ethereum over Bitcoin is if you're a Ethereum miner, you can get partial credit. Bitcoin is kind of like a winner takes all, but with Ethereum, if you like kind of help solve it, you can still get some partial credit. So the first real world example we're going to look at is a thing Microsoft did for Xbox. So they have like publishers, right? And they have to pay royalties to the publishers for Xbox games. So it used to be this total like cluster of a system where they had like all sorts of like printed documentation. They'd have to like go in and do stuff with like PDFs and Excel spreadsheets and just like manually calculate all these royalty payments and then just reconcile them. And it was kind of a mess, apparently. Like different publishers would have different agreements, different locales would have different agreements. Like it was really, really like complicated and messy. And the result of that was game publishers would take about 45 days to get their money. And if you're not getting money in real time or like feedback on how your game's doing in real time, it's hard to just have actionable data for stuff like marketing. Like if you have some big marketing push, but you don't know how well your game is necessarily selling, it's not really useful and you're kind of just like shooting in the dark. So Microsoft, who actually has invested a ton of infrastructure resources into blockchain, it's all on their Azure platform, but it's pretty cool. So they did smart contracts and just did this distributed blockchain for like all the stakeholders. So stakeholders can actually go into the smart contracts, like see how everything's set up, see how it's being calculated. They're going for just a ton of transparency. And the result of that is they can pretty much get paid and get data on like how things are coming in and out pretty much immediately. It's not all kind of behind a curtain and then just a check would show up like the previous system. And also, since it's kind of on the blockchain, like, they're very accountable to it. So Microsoft has said that the transaction costs for publishers are basically gone now. And then Microsoft's own operating costs for this have been cut in half. Like it's been wildly successful for them. So the second example we're going to look at, or I guess third, since Bitcoin was number one, is a company called Webjet. So they are like a booking platform in Australia. So if I have a hotel room and I want to rent it out, obviously, I want to get this hotel room in front of as many people as possible because there's all the competition from the other hotels. So you might have, a travel agency and a couple different booking sites and the chain itself, the lady at the front desk who's like typing on an old computer, and all of them are using different systems. And anyone who's done any kind of enterprisey stuff knows what a nightmare it can be to get a bunch of like legacy systems to talk to each other and figure out data. So in the hospitality industry, they say 5% of bookings are disputed. And that's just billions of dollars in lost revenue every year, where just rooms are double, triple, quadruple booked. And then people will show up at the hotel and just be on vacation or on a work trip or something and not have a place to stay. So on both ends of it, it's just a nightmare because people just aren't getting paid on one end or the other. Like they took money and they gave it to the hotel and then the room was double booked, so they just kind of never got it back or something. It's just a lot of yelling at each other, apparently, from what I read in my research on this. So Webjet created this company called ResChain, and basically it shares booking data between all of the partners, and they don't have to actually run like the nodes. It just kind of prints out like the source of truth for this, and then they can all use that for their systems. So they built it in a way very specifically to not be reliant on like a single person's infrastructure. But yeah, like they said that disputes have gone way down. I don't know the actual number that's been booked now. And they're kind of like working with a somewhat limited number of people, but yeah, it's been super successful. And if there is a double booking, like I saw how you can't really spend Bitcoin twice, it's pretty much discovered like right away. It's not when the person shows up to the hotel or they're looking at their, accounts payable from 2 months ago, realizing that they paid for a room that someone else already booked. So you'll hear some different things that are good for blockchain. Some of them, people are using it as this panacea for everything, and obviously that's not the case, but a voting app might be a cool thing where you want to make sure that there is no tampering with that, and you can see how everyone voted and that they are who they say they are. Both Sony and Microsoft are, in their next generation consoles, going to probably be using blockchain for DRM management. So you would basically have your public and private key, and that's how you know that like you actually bought this content, because it has to phone into the system and make sure you are who you say you are. But basically any app where verifying the identity of participants beyond just like a login and password, financial, like obviously with just cryptocurrency, like how I explained Bitcoin, like it can be kind of a cool thing for trading or trust funds or something. Smart contracts for legal, like that this is the contract and it executes when these are met. If you want to make sure the doctor is the doctor who's writing the prescription. So if you have something that's a good use case, like should you necessarily put it on the blockchain? Like, I don't know. This is something to maybe look more into. Yeah, maybe. Get that VC money, like if nothing else. But at the end of the day, most apps definitely should not be on the blockchain. Like, I am not in this talk trying to convince you to just like abandon ship on Eloquence and just do everything on the blockchain. If you have a CRUD app where data is just going to be constantly changing, you probably don't want like most of that on the blockchain. If you want the ability to go in and control data, which, as much as I was saying, it can be kind of fragile, like a lot of apps, you still want to be able to do that. You want to be able to go in and edit records or delete records. You want to be able to run a migration to change stuff. And with the blockchain, you can't tamper with the history at all. So generally they say if you want a response in like milliseconds, you probably don't want to use the blockchain. Like, especially the bigger it gets, it's just going to run kind of slow. If it's not as much of a priority, or there's just like individual like features you can break off and put on the blockchain, you know, maybe. So Laravel Elites, I don't know if any of you, well, I know about 900 of you did the original version, but I didn't actually like put the V2 on the blockchain. So if you're going to the website and confused why it looks the same, this is all theoretical. But as you know, Laravel Elites is now the de facto hiring standard for Laravel developers. If you're not a Laravel Elite, why even bother applying to Laravel jobs? And in the V2 that's up on GitHub, so before it was literally like a name field and a GitHub username field. So now I added Socialite, and it has GitHub OAuth 2 login. So you have to actually like authenticate with GitHub, and then it saves your ID and stuff. But in this hypothetical version 2 of Laravel Elites, a few people in the community approached me and said, Samantha, it's not fair that you're the only person who can declare people Laravel Elites. I should also be able to declare people Laravel Elites. I said, okay, Taylor Atwell, you can also do that. Or various people who run conferences or whatever. It's a limited number of trusted people that we've decided we're going to have this shared Laravel Elites process, where it doesn't necessarily have to be a test, but they can just say this person should be elite. So if I were building this in the V1, I would probably just give them like an API key and then just let them make API calls to add data, right? I mean, just pretty straightforward. But let's say something like this happened. So someone tried to start a Twitter beef with me, as people on Twitter occasionally are wont to do. So theoretically, and I'm not saying that I would do this, I'm saying I could do this. I could go find this guy in the database, which again, the rest of the people who are certifiers don't have access to. This is my app. They just have API keys where they're kind of like phoning home. And I could go to where it says is elite. I could change that value to deal. Sorry, chat programmer, you're not elite anymore. And there really wouldn't be a way for the other partners to know that I did that. I'm sure Chad Programmer would raise a fuss on Twitter about it, but I could be like, oh, you weren't elite in the first place, and he wouldn't really have a great way to contest that. But if this were on the blockchain and multiple people had copies of this blockchain, I couldn't just go in and like edit his info. They could see that I did that. So I probably just have to, you know, do what I usually do and just get into it with him on Twitter and eventually get mad and block him. So if you are developing blockchain applications, we're going to go through a couple of different tools and libraries that you should know. Definitely not going to go super into them, but at the very least, this will hopefully be a good kind of like launching point for you to get started. So the first one is web3.js. This is like the main library that you would use to interact with Ethereum with JavaScript. I've seen a couple of PHP libraries when I was doing research for this app. Most of them look like they either weren't maintained anymore or were like read-only. If you find one or if you write one, definitely let me know if it's any good. I can throw it up on Twitter or whatever. So the next tool suite is, it's called Truffle. So there are 3 different tools. We'll go through all 3 of them pretty briefly. But it's open source, it's totally free, and they're all kind of for specifically, like they're great for local development too. So Truffle Framework, it is basically just like a framework for Ethereum and smart contracts. Just makes it a lot easier to like work with them. And the cool thing is they have various boxes, which are basically just like, I would say like demo projects, but you can pull them down and just kind of get started really quickly with your technology of choice, or use as an example if you're, you know, writing something from scratch. They've got them for Vue, they've got them for React, they've got them for the various native, like React Native and stuff. They've got just kind of like a vanilla Webpack one. So yeah, there's a lot of kind of demo code to get you started. The next tool is Ganache. So what that does is sets up just like a personal like blockchain, almost like, you know, that one personal database. You're not sharing this with anybody, that you would use them for local development. And they have a desktop app for all the operating systems that you can download. They also have a CLI tool if you would prefer that. And we'll look at it in a second when we go look at the code. But basically just got this like block explorer so you can see when things are being added. You can see the transactions. Just kind of like keeps you in the loop of what's happening in your app. It's really cool. So this is kind of what it looks like. And like I said, we'll look at it a little bit more in a second. And the final one we'll go through super briefly is Drizzle. So this is not, we're not using this in my demo project, but basically it's a bunch of libraries that are built on top of Redux, and they just keep data synchronized for you. So if you are using React, it's probably a no-brainer to use this. You can use Vue with Redux. I don't know if you all would want to. If any of you want to build a Vuex Drizzle, I think that there could potentially be some sort of market for it. So yeah, there are Vue Truffle boxes, but if you wanted to specifically like use this to keep your data in sync, you'd have to write the code yourself, unfortunately. I say Team React. I actually am writing Vue full time with my new job, so I've betrayed Team React. So the next tool is MetaMask, and it's a web wallet. So basically, you can manage your Ethereum keys. You can install it via Chrome. It's free, but it lets you interact with other blockchain applications without running the node. So it's pretty cool. And when you're running Ganache and MetaMask and like a test blockchain, it gives you about 100 Ether to start. So that's, I don't really have $13,000 in my test account, but that's cool too, because then you can actually like be testing stuff out without spending any sort of real money. The next thing is Solidity. So what Solidity is, so you're not writing contracts in actual JavaScript. There's a separate language, but it's super, super similar. We'll look at a sample in a second. It is statically typed, but basically, yeah, it's just a language to implement smart contracts. So then Truffle, kind of how it ties into that is it lets you migrate them. So it'll compile them down to JSON, which you can then use in your JavaScript, and it'll store them on the blockchain for you. So I imagine pretty much every Laravel developer could look at this code and figure out what is going on. So it's just, you know, you're basically storing and getting data, but yeah, it's very, very similar to JavaScript or PHP. They have a ton of great examples on their website, like a voting app, some sort of like auction app. And there are a ton of great tutorials out there too. So the learning curve on it is definitely not bad at all. And the final tool I want to talk to y'all about is CoinPress. So this is my shameless self-promotion side and kind of my inspiration for this talk. So my partner, Eric Pileski, he wanted to get back into programming and was really into blockchain. So he wrote this tool to kind of like create your own Ethereum blockchain in seconds. So me being the aggressively helpful girlfriend that I am, decided to help him. So I did kind of like a web app and a Laravel API for it. The rest of it's written in .NET. If you guys do have any questions in the speaker questions forum, he also might be jumping in to help. He was totally instrumental in like helping with this talk and knows a ton about blockchain stuff. So you might be seeing him respond too. But yeah, it's basically got free node hosting. We just launched it fairly recently. It's still in pretty active development. Right now, it's mostly kind of targeting .NET developers because he's a .NET developer. Just threw my mouth a little bit, I'm sorry. But if this is something that people in the Laravel community are picking up and using and getting into, definitely hit us up on like Twitter or email us. Let us know, and we're happy to just like be building Mac wallets or other features. But basically, how it works is it says create a new coin, but coin just means blockchain. So you can give it a name. You create the starting difficulty. So when you're mining, like how difficult that algorithm is to solve. And then basically we'll just create a wallet for you and a server that you can run. It's really, really cool. It's really easy. Like I said, it's totally free. So we are going to go look at some code. But if you did enjoy my talk, follow me on Twitter if you haven't already. It is a lot of shit posting and a lot of politics. So if that's not your flavor, I apologize in advance. You can also follow Eric on Twitter. He is pretty new to it and he hasn't been tweeting much, but I feel like at this point in my career, like my dream is to just be part of a Twitter power couple and you guys can make that dream reality if you follow him. And he's the funniest guy I know. Like, we just got to get him tweeting more, and I promise it'll be comedy gold. And he will be way less abrasive about social justice stuff than me. And then we do have a Twitter for CoinPress. So if you do try it out, you want any features developed, if you have any questions, definitely let us know. And definitely after my talk, stick around for Matt Stauffer's talk. He's my good friend. And his book is coming out in a couple of months too. It's the second version of Laravel Up and Running. I was one of the technical readers for it. It is so good. I have been doing Laravel development for like 6 years now and still learned a ton reading this book. So definitely pre-order it, check it out. It's gonna be awesome. So let's look at some code. Spencer Hale account, I will chat with you later. All right, close this down. Okay, so I have locally Laravel Elite's blockchain running, and we'll take a quick peek at the database here. I just did a migrate fresh seed. So the users table is pretty straightforward. Like I said, I'm using Socialite for auth, so there's no password. It stores both the GitHub ID and the username. You can change GitHub usernames, so I'm not using that as much for things like writing the certification to the blockchain. The GitHub ID shouldn't change though, it's just like a bunch of numbers. Other than that though, this is a really straightforward Laravel app. You have the questions, you have the answers to that questions, pivot table for user answers. But yeah, like this is all data that you wouldn't want to store on the blockchain, because if people are signing up or I'm changing the answers or whatever, like the blockchain doesn't need to care about that. The only thing that the blockchain is going to care about in this application is whether or not someone's certified. So that way, if Taylor decides that he wants to just certify all Laracon speakers, they don't have to go through this stuff. It just basically says this person with this GitHub ID is certified as a Laravel Elite. So we're also going to look quickly at Ganache. So this is the local blockchain tool I was telling you all about. This is their blockchain explorer. So it sets up 10 test accounts with 100 other each automatically for you. Right now, because this is just kind of a fresh copy, we don't have any transactions or anything, but once those start being added, you can see that they're being added in here. And the other thing we're going to look at before we do anything is a Solidity contract. So this is the contract for two different things. The first is to actually certify people. So it's just a function that takes their GitHub ID and a Boolean for whether or not they're certified. There's a little bit of validation to make sure that if they're already certified, it's not adding them to the blockchain, because we don't want that extra data in there. If they're already certified, why bother? So basically we have this applicant container that's just GitHub ID certified, and this would be the public address of the certifier, who in this case would be me. And then we're creating this mapping, which is just, you can think of almost like an array of all of the applicants. So basically what we're just saying is applicants with the key of the GitHub ID, just create a new applicant. And it's really kind of that simple. And that's just would store it on the chain. To get an applicant to query, you take the GitHub ID, you just go into that applicant's object with the key, and it finds them. So two functions, really simple. So installing Truffle in a Laravel project, generally speaking, so I'm gonna throw this, because it's Laravel, in the JS folder under resources, because that's kind of where the JavaScript lives. A lot of Truffle projects, you will see these contracts in the migrations and then this build folder. You'll see those in root. So one thing that is a little bit of a gotcha if you're doing specifically that in a Laravel project, there's a Truffle config file, and you basically just need to tell it that it lives in a different place. Other than that, it's pretty easy. The config is super straightforward, just says run it on this port, and I don't really have anything else set up. So we had that Solidity contract, right? And we need to actually store it on the blockchain and be able to interact with it via our Laravel application, because it's you can't just talk to Solidity. So you need to run what is called a Truffle migration, and we will do that right now. say Truffle migrate. So what that does is it goes in and gets your contracts. There's also this like boilerplate Truffle migrations. We're not going to worry about that right now because it just kind of comes with Truffle. But yeah, then basically it just compiles them and deploys them to the blockchain. It costs a very small amount of Ether. But if we go back into Ganache here, so transactions was empty before and it was current black 0. But you can see that we created contracts in the blockchain and then we called them. And if we go into this first account here, it has a slightly smaller balance of Ether. So those are compiled in this build folder. Just this long JSON file that you really aren't ever going to need to worry about aside from just pulling it into your view components or whatever. But we're going to do yarn watch to compile our JavaScript here. And I'll show you kind of how this is set up. It's super, super bare bones. I didn't want to add a ton of business logic that was going to be kind of confusing with like how it actually works. But if I hit login, I already authenticated with GitHub, so it should just kind of kick me through. So it's like, oh, hey, Samantha Geitz, and added a new user. So we're going to do this quiz super fast. I am Taylor Atwell. Am I a lead? So you saw it kind of like flickered for a second. And that's because it's actually like querying the blockchain to see if I'm a lead. If I were wanting to have a little bit more code in there, I'd probably have a nice little loading indicator or something, but that's okay. So let's look at the view code that actually powers the certificate right now. Going back into my code base here. Certificate view. So this is very straightforward view code, I think, for people even who aren't super familiar with Vue. Basically, the first thing we're checking is if it's loading, if it has the data from the blockchain. And then we're checking if there's like an applicant that's certified. If not, which I'm not right now, just shows some really basic info, says I'm not a member of the Laravel elite. The actual props here, there's a user that's being passed in from the Laravel side, from the user database. We'll talk about this in a second. Then also created this blockchain mixin, so we'll look at that. So there's a couple things I'm importing here. The first is the Web3 library that we talked about. It's the JavaScript library that you would use to actually talk to Ethereum. I'm also importing this helper library from Truffle called Truffle Contract. So that just makes it a little bit easier to kind of work with contracts. They have some nice helper functions and stuff. Then I'm pulling in that certificate from the build. So not the Solidity file, the JSON one. And then just passing it through to the Truffle contract. Setting up just like a very basic applicant just so I can kind of check if it's certified or not. The certifier address is my Ethereum address. The contract address is the address of the contract that's been deployed to the blockchain. And then, like I said, we're just kind of doing a basic check if these all exist yet, so we know if it's loading or not. So we have a created hook where we're just kind of initializing the library. MetaMask will sometimes like inject a version of it. So this is all kind of just boilerplatey Truffle Framework stuff that I copy pasted. Then from there, we are going to actually say like which account of the Ethereum account is my account. If there were a bunch of people using this app, I would probably need a bit better logic for this, but for right now, just the first one. And then we're setting that, since we need to know that in order to actually query the contract. To actually get whether the applicant is certified, pretty straightforward. We're just saying, okay, so at this contract address, we want to call the getApplicant method, which we'll go back to the Solidity file, is this bad boy right here. And from there, I'm going to pop open my console here. So this is what it sends back. You can call to string on this, and it'll grab, this is my GitHub ID. I am not certified currently, and then since nobody certified me, this is just like an empty certifier address. So to actually certify, First thing I'm going to do, and again, if this were production, I probably want a bit more security around this, but I'm going to set myself as an admin here. I'm going to go into certify and have a little certify button here. So let's actually look at the view component for this quick. Very, very, very straightforward. On click, it calls the certify method from the blockchain Nixon. Sorry, I have a Zoom thing on top that's blocking my thing. Certify is very similar to get applicant, where basically it just calls certify on the Solidity instance, and then it refetches the applicant since they are certified now. We want to make sure that data is correct. So if I hit certify, it's going to pop up this thing from my web wallet, and it does cost, like I said, a small amount of like Ether to do anything on the blockchain. So it's not really 22 cents though, it's just totally test data. This is not costing me anything. But if I hit confirm, it says Laravel Elite. I go back into certificate. I'm spelling this right here. Now I have Laravel Elite status. So it's not stored at all in this database. And yeah, that is theoretically something that a bunch of different people could kind of run this and dial into. And if someone else decides to name me or Chad Programmer or anyone else as a Laravel Elite, it would just kind of fetch that from this like central repository. So yeah, it's a cool technology. And like I said, definitely most apps don't need it. But if you want just kind of like a central, or I guess decentralized thing that you can trust people to an extent, but just kind of want a lot of transparency in your data and you're not doing crazy business logic, there definitely are some use cases for it. Like I said, VCs do love that blockchain buzzword. So if you have any questions about it, please definitely let me know either in the speaker channel, hit me up on Twitter, hit Eric up on Twitter if you have any kind of more CoinPress, like nitty gritty specific questions. And we are totally happy to help you guys. So that is it for me. I hope you guys learned something.
Awesome. We have a minute here, so I do have one question I thought was just be interesting, and one we could answer without getting too technical.
Yeah.
What have you used to what do you use to stay up to speed on blockchain, or maybe websites or tools or things you used to get this far when you were doing the initial research? So like a central site that's the best, or you just kind of like picking it up all over?
Oh man, it's actually probably a really good question for Eric because he was the one that built all the actual like wallet stuff in CoinPress. To build this, Truffle, I will show you, has some really awesome like tutorials. So if you want to get started and not even worry about a Laravel thing, definitely go through this tutorial. It's great. They kind of give you all of the JavaScript you need to get going. And it really kind of walks you through how smart contracts work, how testing them works, which I didn't even touch in this project.
Right.
Beyond that, it's a lot of Googling and Stack Overflow. I'm sure there are some really great resources out there, but
standard developer stuff.
I mean, you guys know how it goes. So you're like, I want to answer this one very specific problem, so I'm going to Google it and read this guy's blog from 2 years ago and figure out how. There's not a ton of Vue blockchain development happening right now.
Right.
So if you do write any cool Vue libraries and you want me to give you a shout out on Twitter, like please, please, please let me know, and I would be happy to kind of throw that out there.
Cool. All right, that's great. It was cool to see some code behind it because you always just hear about it, but if you don't have the opportunity to use it, you don't really get to see the code. So I think that was really cool.
Yeah, I've got a GitHub repository that you guys can all kind of pull down and poke around at and run locally. If you have any questions about getting it up and running, definitely let me know.
I think that was our first interactive talk on Laracon Online, so that was cool. And you were the server, so that was also cool. So it was like a trifecta there.
I didn't know. I, for some reason, thought it was an actual chat room. That was a little bit more slow.
Oh, it still worked, too.
Thank you for everyone who jumped in on that. I'm interested in how many replies we ended up getting.
Just hammering the sponsors, that's all. All right, thanks a lot.
All right, thank you.